Joining us now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee in the House. He's here tonight for the interview. Congressman, thank you for being here.
It's good to be with you.
I have a lot of things to talk to you about, but this has just come out. Have you had a chance to absorb this reporting at all?
I have, yes.
Can you tell me if you think this is a significant advance in the story, if this is a serious development?
It's a very serious development, and I think we need to look at this in the chronology, and that is, this goes back to June of last year, just when the now president has essentially seized the Republican nomination. If this article is correct, his son gets an email from someone who helped the Trump family do business in Russia saying, the Russian government is helping your father get elected president. We have some damaging information. You should take this meeting. Donald Jr. takes the meeting with this woman who's an advocate for the Kremlin, along with Kushner and Paul Manafort. During that meeting, she brings up the Magnitsky Act, which is a bill that provides sanctions on human rights abusers in Russia, something that Putin hated. After that meeting, we know what happens in terms of the hacking and dumping, the dumping of documents. This meeting purportedly in June. In July, the Russians start dumping documents helpful to Donald Trump, hurtful to Hillary Clinton. And then, flash forward after the election, investigation starts, and the family is asked, the president is asked, did you have any meetings with any representatives of the Russian government? The answer is no, absolutely not in a million years. And then Donald Jr. is asked, well, what about this meeting? And in a pattern we have seen over and over again, when confronted with evidence of particular meetings, they're forced to acknowledge, oh, well, yes, we did have that meeting. But that meeting was about adoptions.
Right.
They're confronted again, and then it's acknowledged, okay, Paul Manafort came to this meeting about adoptions. Now, why would the campaign manager come to a meeting about adoptions? And then it's acknowledged, okay, it wasn't really just about adoptions, it was about sanctions, the Magnitsky Act, but it was also because we were offered damaging material against Hillary Clinton, which we were really disappointed with, that it wasn't damaging enough, and she didn't seem to have the goods. But of course, the goods came out the following month. So obviously, there's a lot to unpack here, but the chronology, I think, is very concerning. It's all warrants a thorough investigation. Everyone who's in that meeting ought to come before our committee. These emails that are described, we need to see. It's obviously a narrative completely at odds with what the First Family has said and represented time after time. So I think it's very significant.
The defense against the implications of this reporting has been evolving on the right. And it's not just from the White House, it's among the president's supporters as well. And you're seeing it really, I think, a lot in the conservative media now. And that is that even if you don't like this, you find it distasteful that Americans might have cooperated in what the Russians were doing to try to influence our election, there's nothing criminal about it. That collusion, like the term person of interest or something. It's a way that people talk about the law that doesn't actually reflect any sort of criminal statute. What do you think about that argument? Well,
one of the things that it makes me wonder, because we have been now hearing this evolving argument. First it was there's no collusion, and then there was this shift to, okay, even if there was collusion, that's not a crime. Now, what I wonder when these stories started coming out is, these stories don't appear in a vacuum. The reporters who write these stories often will go to get a comment or feedback, and so the family might know these stories are coming out. Does this account for the shifting narrative away from there's no evidence of collusion to collusion's not a crime? I don't know. The reality is, conspiracy is a crime. Now, collusion is a colloquial term, as is coordination. Conspiracy is a crime.
Conspiracy to do what, though?
Well, the hacking of American institutions by a foreign power is a crime. If there is a conspiracy to obtain foreign assistance in violation of U.S. election laws in a campaign, that's a crime. Now, I'm not saying that these crimes were committed, but those are crimes.
Would foreign assistance, and I've seen a lot of sort of lawyerly writing about this today, and I'm not a lawyer, and so I'm not sure I always get it, but I get that foreigners are not allowed to make campaign contributions, for example, that foreigners are not allowed to play that kind of explicit role role in our elections. And I would understand, even from a non-lawyer's perspective, that soliciting that or conspiring to make that happen or even covering up that that happened might be seen as a crime. If you were talking about something like campaign donations. In this case, it seems like what they're talking about is a Russian effort to influence our election, but not necessarily by giving the Trump campaign money or giving anybody money, although we don't know about that part of it. It seems like the way they were trying to influence it was by giving them something else of value, giving them intel, giving them maybe, stolen documents. Does that fall under the same part of the criminal law?
Well, it certainly could in a couple ways. First of all, this meeting in June where the Magnitsky Act is raised and this advocate for the Kremlin wants basically Donald Trump, if he becomes president, to do away with the Magnitsky Act. If in that meeting they signaled an openness, a willingness, a receptivity to doing that, and there's any kind of a quid pro quo arrangement, that is, help us get elected, we'll do away with this, obviously that would be a crime. I'm not saying that's what took place. But when we're looking at what are potential violations here, that would obviously be a violation. But also if there's an effort to solicit what would be an in-kind contribution, that is, if you can do op research for us and provide that to us, that, I think, very much invokes whether there's an illegal solicitation of an in-kind contribution, a failure to report what would be an illegal contribution from a foreign power. Right. And, of course, any false statements to authorities about any of that would be an offense. So there clearly, under certain circumstances, are lots of criminal laws that would be applicable. Now, again, very separate question about whether that's the case here, but you can't say as a generic overarching matter that getting the help of a foreign power in an election is not a crime, because there are a lot of circumstances where it would be.
Congressman Adam Schiff is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Can you stick around, sir?
Yes.
We'll be back with Congressman Schiff in just a moment. We'll be right back. We're back now with Congressman Adam Schiff, who is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. As we are absorbing this new information from the New York Times, they're reporting, citing an email described to the New York Times by 3 people, that ahead of the meeting that took place last June, which was reported on by the Times this weekend, between a Kremlin-backed lawyer and basically the triumvirate at the top of the Trump campaign, his campaign manager, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his eldest son, Donald Jr. Before that meeting took place, the business acquaintance who arranged that meeting sent an email to Donald Trump Jr. informing him explicitly that if they were going to get compromising information about Hillary Clinton from this meeting, they should know that that material was from the Russian government, and it was part of a Russian government effort to aid his father's candidacy. Congressman Schiff, one of the things that was reported by the New York Times in their initial version of this story this weekend was that this meeting they had discovered evidence of was first disclosed by Jared Kushner when he revised his application for a security clearance. Apparently, he's revised that application multiple times now. They then said that Paul Manafort had also described this meeting in documents that he had handed over to congressional investigators. Can you tell us anything about either of those sets of documentation, any of that information as it pertains to your committee, House Intelligence?
I can't go into what documents we received or what the contents are. But one other thing that really leaps out about this to me is this is taking place in June. So this is taking place before the documents are dumped. Now, one of the questions that we're investigating is, did the Russians begin this as an intelligence gathering operation and later decide to make it a weaponization of data operation, or did they begin with that intent in mind? And
I'm sorry to interrupt. You're saying that the Russians had done the hacking already, but at the point of this meeting, they were holding the intelligence. They're holding the stuff that they had stolen.
Yes.
But then after this meeting happened in Trump Tower, they then started releasing it publicly.
If this is in June of 2016, that's exactly right. So the hacking had been earlier, the theft of documents had been earlier, but they hadn't been dumped. And at this point, we wouldn't have known that the Russians intended to escalate that way. So if this is correct, the first person who may have found out that the Russians had decided not just to gather information about what the candidates' positions might be or what they might do in office, but they had made a decision to intervene to try to help a candidate. The first person who may have learned that was the president's son through this email, because at that time, we couldn't be sure whether this was going to go beyond the intelligence gathering operation.
So when they were just stealing stuff, when they were stealing documents, that's what I traditionally think of as a spying operation. I think of spying mostly as stealing secrets. When, whether it's, potentially damaging political information or useful industrial information or military, whatever it is, stealing information is spying. But when it came to turn that around and not just let the Russian government use it for its own purposes at home, but to use it on the American public to change our behavior. That's what you're describing as the weaponization of that information. Yes,
exactly.
And that's what was new about this attack, right?
Absolutely. Other countries engage in foreign intelligence gathering. We engage in foreign intelligence gathering. What was remarkable here was that the Russians decided to go beyond that in the most powerful nation on earth, and that is turn that data into a weapon designed to influence outcomes. And, as I mentioned in that very early open hearing we had with James Comey in the House, the period of the summer of last year was very significant because that's when it went from information gathering to weaponization. So what was it about that summer? What was happening during that summer? Now, we know during that summer, the Republican Party platform did not incorporate that strong language about providing defensive weapons to Ukraine. So the platform went in a pro-Russian direction. Was there also some effect of this meeting or other meetings? These are unanswered questions that we really need to find out. Were there things that contributed to the Russians' willingness to intervene on one side in our election?
One last question for you on this. The Russian government doesn't operate in the same way that our government does. All governments are different. It seems like one of the things that we as Americans have a hard time wrapping our head around is that a Russian somebody acting on behalf of the Russian president, somebody acting on behalf of the Russian government, isn't always a Russian government official. So in this case, the person who was in this meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, apparently talking about sanctions, and they believed she was going to be talking to them about dirt on Hillary Clinton that the Russian government had obtained, according to this new reporting. She's a private lawyer. She says that she's never worked on behalf of the Russian government. We certainly know that she was married to a Russian government official. She has represented high-ranking Russian government officials and their family members, but she's not herself an official. She is just a Russian lawyer. Does that at all change your understanding of whether or not this was an effort connected to the Russian government's operations?
Not at all, because this is how the Russians operate. They use oligarchs, they use influential people that have spent time in the United States or other countries as extensions of their power and their influence. In fact, when we had Director Brennan, former CIA Director Brennan, testify in open session in the House, he talked about this, how the Russians will use people sometimes unbeknownst to their American targets, and he talked about being concerned with things he was seeing, that he referred these matters to Director Comey for counterintelligence investigation. And he also said that, you might see contacts with Americans that rise to the level of having these counterintelligence concerns where the Americans, before they know it, get entangled in ways they may not have been able to see coming. But what's significant here, of course, is if this report about this email is accurate, and the email said the Russian government is trying to help your father, then there's no mystery about what this lawyer is up to and who she's representing, because that was the whole purpose of the meeting. So you can't claim ignorance if you're told in advance this person is acting essentially as an agent.
Yeah, and if that email ends up, that written warning to you ends up in the New York Times months later, it makes sense that today's the day you got yourself a lawyer. Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, it's nice to have you here, sir.